Welcome to Prime Suspects for your weekly insider's look behind the counter of Prime Sports. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis, and with it being Thanksgiving week here in the US, a different news cycle that comes with a holiday week lends itself to a bit of a different format. So today we're going to go deep on one topic, and that would be David Hill's recent 10,000-word article published by Rolling Stone titled Sportsbook Nation, with the headline, "Is the $11 billion online sportsbook bubble about to burst?" Guys, we will put the Prime Suspect stamp on this piece as best we can, kicking off, as always, with Inside Prime as our lead segment. And this piece leads with a courtsider, someone who bets from a live sporting event, theoretically and often practically with a real-time information advantage. Joe, I'd like to bring you in first here and get your input when it comes to Prime's point of view on the practice of courtsiding.
It's really difficult unless you see through a series of wagers to understand whether somebody's courtside, but we don't have an eye on them. So, I mean, this is actually probably more appropriate for Adam. I think the challenge that we have, right, is that Prime has two very different regulatory environments between New Jersey and Ohio, as far as when it comes to how we might deal with bets, whether it's pass posting, courtsiding, things like that. New Jersey is very pro player. Oftentimes, we're just, even when we detect something like pass posting, we're eating it, right? Because the regulator is saying like, well, that's on you. Whereas Ohio is very different. Ohio seems to be very pro operator. But then again, like canceling wagers is not exactly great for the brand when we're saying like, hey, we'll take all comers and everything like that. This is not a black and white thing. But what it does point out is that there is a real orange race, and that some of the things that we're required to have, like the data feeds and everything like that, particularly when we're paying pretty significantly for that. Great examples like the NFL official data feed, where in addition to paying a fee, we have to pay revenue share. Well, they got to step their game up, because we're going to constantly be on the back heel. And like I said, we don't have live satellite coverage over every stadium, every ballpark, every racetrack, or anything like that to be able to see like, okay, well, who's there or anything like that. So there's no easy answer on this one.
Adam, would love to hear you speak as broadly as you'd like to this topic. And specifically, let's lead off with how you mitigate against courtsiding from a risk management perspective.
So, yes, I mean, first part of the anonymous bettor that he had, we couldn't know his real name because would mean that he can't bet. First line of sad state of affairs of American regulated sports betting with the operators that are in play right now. But the goal of this is to compete with those guys. And this is where the radars, the geniuses and that, rest on their agreements, their official agreements, rest on the fact that the leagues actually own percentages of these companies. So, changing these official agreements and anything and putting the onus back on the data collectors to have this product as fast and expedient as possible to compete with those courtsiders, it is possible. So, it's going back to how to mitigate. You take the bets, you watch where they are. Now, especially in the regulated market, you can pin where the bets are coming from. So you can see on the X point or the GeoComply, funny enough, that's coming from inside A&T Stadium or very close nearby. And they're betting a Dallas game or a soccer game or something like that within that space. So there's different ways to look at it. As Joe sort of said, a few bets on this, you can start to see, okay, they're just beating the odds movement, which again, the traders often use a terminology of pass posting. It's just taking advantage of a line movement by being courtside. It's not really a pass posting offense per se after the game's done or after a goal scored or after certain aspects of that. But that's kind of one of the battles. And that's where, getting intricate with your delays on live betting, understanding where the data is coming from and how many seconds delay you need to do this. Ultimately, and I think Matt and Ed at Deck Prism sort of sold this best of trying to get back to zero possible latency for taking a bet. You want the live experience to be like pregame, where you click a button, the bet goes through. And you can do that for probably 90% of all bettors, where you can literally remove any kind of delay in their live betting to move it that full way to zero. Then there's the others that you identify as courtsiders that say your average is 4 to 5 seconds on the data feeds, knowing that there is a delay, and moving them to 7 or 8 seconds. And that's sort of how you mitigate some of those aspects, by taking the bet still from all the players, not turning them off, not cutting them out, but identifying that if they are courtsiding, that making the friction a little heavier than the total frictionless experience. That you have some players where you can move them to zero. And I've said it multiple times. There's some people that you could give them the final score and they'll still find the losing side. So that's sort of the balance of, trying again to let everybody bet, embrace everybody coming in. But if you're going to play games, we're going to play games. And it's for us to build those tools to do that, rather than just turn people off completely.
And while we're talking courtsiding, I also heard Joe use the term past posting. Of course, a lot of overlap between those two phrases. I wonder if there is perhaps a delineation when it comes to an information advantage somebody could have in real time from an event, but where there's still some element of risk involved, so they're not past posting. Thinking of the coin toss of an NFL game, betting on a team to score first or win the first quarter if you know they're going to receive the opening kickoff. Adam, do you view things any differently from a risk management standpoint when there could still be at least some risk involved versus straight up past posting by a courtsider?
Yeah, I mean, you gave some good examples there. Cost of the coin goes in the air, you hear what's called, you see where they're going, and you can still bet it. Bent over, past posted. If you're seeing who gets the ball and, the first quarter, first to score, they're advantageous bets on information. They're not past posting because the plays still have to play out. Yes, there may be an opportunity to arbitrage that position within the next few minutes, but that's also just using information and the ability to get it. I spent 10 years before the internet really started to rock and roll, forgetting information, watching games on TV, all those kind of things to do that. That's just, for me, that's part of the game. That's bookie versus better. It's the ones that are, term I love these days is high frequency trading, where they're betting like $20, $25 to go under the radar, and they're doing it, as goals are scored or certain aspects of it, soccer, tennis, things like that. Doing it on key points, like a key break point, like this guy was setting up, will there be a hit or whatever it was, setting that up on both sides of, will this, knowing the market will move significantly when there's a break point on whoever, wins it on a tennis match. But that's where the data, scouts, the data, the way they're doing it can ultimately make a difference. The radars and the geniuses have gotten really lazy by doing the scouting from TV versus the years and years of putting scouts into stadiums. So the onus is back on them. They keep putting their hand out for more and more money, but their product keeps getting shittier and shittier, which is now, reaching out niches and market spaces for others to come into that space and compete. It was a good acquisition by DraftKings or Simplebet. From what I'd understood and what I'd seen, they built out a great scouting on certain sports. Well, acquiring that, bringing it in-house, now they're talking about, are they going to build out this network so they have their own data coming in versus having to go to third parties? That's worth so much in certain times, but having 2,000, 3,000 scouts is expensive. So that's where the balance of all this sort of comes into the business side of it, is sometimes you're forced to use the garbage of radar or genius versus, finding another method because of these agreements that they have. And again, the leagues are in bed with them, so it's going to make it harder and harder, more expensive, which ultimately hurts the leagues as well.
One of the things I think is interesting about this is, like, we're sitting here and we're talking about scouting networks. Doesn't it seem remarkably analog for where we are in the world right now? Is that we're talking about like computing armies of people sitting there with tablets and they're keying in with the key. There's gaps in it. We know this, Adam knows this. There's gaps in it when, guys misinterpret, they fat thumb the button on the tablet and misidentify a play, or they incorrectly total yards or result of the play and things like that. And I'm still amazed at how incredibly analog this experience is. And not just, forget about from the sports betting perspective. When you talk about like Moneyball, sports analytics is such a huge part of athletics, of sports today. And that they're still relying on training an army of people where, just imagine the top to bottom variance on your scouts as they're sitting there in the stand, like you're going to have better scouts than others, and to have these industries, billions and billions of dollars that are hanging on your front line is a bunch of dudes at whatever state, whatever kind of quality, and what is the latency between their connection and their iPads. I mean, it really is kind of a joke in this day and age that we're still here and that we don't have much more digital solutions to this kind of stuff.
And in such an analog environment, the door can open to more information asymmetry at times. I think that ties back to some of Adam's comments about the game of cat and mouse that can play out between the bookie and the bettor. And I think that's a great way to get into our water cooler segment this week. When it comes to player profiling, David Hill's piece included a quote from Elihu Foistel, who attended our live show at Bet Bash, by the way, claiming he can identify 90% of winning bettors in the first 20 bets, with a primary factor being whether or not they get closing line value. Adam, I'd be curious for your thoughts here. How many bets does it take you to identify a winner? And what factors would you use beyond CLV?
Boy, Joe's warming up. He knows what's coming. First of all, CLV.
Oh my God, this is great.
I mean, I get it. I get its purpose in some spots, but the way that this CLV is just overthrown and overblown and whatnot, just, it is what it is. People use it for certain reasons, whatnot. Now, I mean, that's even becoming a more cat and mouse game, because the first books that I open, my first 50 bets have no CLV. Like, you're playing parlays, you're playing some casino, you play that thing and you'll cost yourself $4,000 or $5,000 on a new account just to prime it up for placing some futures and aiming for some big takeout at some point. Most people that are trying to win are playing that game now. So identifying within 20 bets, you can generally do it within 2 or 3 if they're coming in playing it the right way. And ultimately, it's looking at the bet ticker, seeing the timing of the bet, what the position is, the board's moving, identifying whether originator or an ARB guy and things like that. You can do it within a handful of bets. 20 should be 95 to 99% certain that there's, something that if they're playing it the right way. But most guys now, they're not coming in straight for the first, 20, 30, 40 bets. They're playing around the game. They're trying to build up the account. And because they're playing a long game, ultimately, on that. So, yeah, 20 bets is an arbitrary number. I think you can do it a lot quicker if they're playing straight up. And 10 years ago, most people were playing straight up because they could get a bet. They weren't worried about getting limited in that aspect. Now there's as much cat and mouse on the courtsiding as there is getting a new account, making sure you fatten it up, make it look good so they can't profile you properly. And then after 3 or 6 months, then you start bringing in the real stuff. And for me, again, it's playing futures where, hopefully in 12 months' time, there's an 80 to 1 shot that I've managed to get down a couple of thousand, and then you make sure you make extreme value of the account in that way. But on the bookmaker side, again, arbitrary number, and I think everyone's getting to know my opinion on CLV.
It's funny how Elihu's turned this into and this is really speaking to the guys in my age group, like an episode of Name That Tune, the old game show where the people would sit there like, I can name that song in 10 notes. I can name that song in 5 notes. I can name a sharp player in 10, 25 bets. So what this really speaks of is what friction in the marketplace and what a misallocation of time, resources, money, all of that. And even though right now you look at it, the burden's on the player, right? Like, oh, they got to go in there, they got to donkey in a bunch of money. They got to intentionally do sad plays to make themselves look soft in the hopes that they can keep this account open, so that at some point down the future, they could stick their fangs in and get just enough out of those guys before the account goes dry. And then they got to do it all over again. I mean, what a sad state of affairs for the industry. And I only want to know how much, FanDuel, DraftKings, when it comes to time, effort, money, resources, systems, things that they're doing on the flip side of that in order to sit there and detect it and try and do the countermeasures against it. And it's all money that would otherwise be deployed into the marketplace. And we would all contest for that. And regulators and lawmakers ought to be sitting at this and going what's the opportunity cost? What's the real cost to us in the form of taxes that could be coming back to us? Okay, yeah, sure. If Adams has somebody donkeying, a couple of $1,000 into an account for him right now, playing parlays and blackjack and whatever other, thrill kill stuff that they're doing to make them look like a really soft bettor. How much time and effort is it really worth? Okay. Versus if they would just kind of attenuate their risk management just a little bit, start making those investments instead of like early detection systems of sharp guys, like systems that actually combat sharp guys. But again, I mean, I'm really coming around to this is that, we can sit here and we can beat fan kings on the head. We can beat our chests about that's not the way to do it. But, the market's going to have to start, and it's probably the middle way. It's probably the players are going to have to come up with different solutions to do this. And I don't think this, the army of beards and whatever is going to be sustainable for long, because it's a technology advantage. If LLU can detect you in 20 notes, fan kings will probably develop systems that can detect you in 3, and they don't need to have beyond a reasonable doubt. They just close you down and worry about it later. They just don't have to bother with it. And again, this is money that would be better deployed playing into the marketplace, potentially taxable, but definitely rescuable from the other sources that they have to go to offshore, on the street, whatever, in order to be able to play that money straight.
And to that point, people know they can play it straight at books like Prime, so account grooming could be an entirely different process, if any process at all. I do wonder if there are some bettors who might use it as an opportunity to perhaps throw out head fakes, respecting the influence of a book like Prime or others that take all comers. So in cases like that, how might that change the equation from player profiling on your guys' side of the counter?
I mean, you have that. That's another aspect of the cat and mouse game. Generally, it's take the bet or the number. And if there's another bet coming back the other way and someone wants to move the entire market based off the respect that a certain book has, then all the more to them. We're happy to also play that game. We know someone's looking to do that and they know the market respects us and we get that information early. We'll move that stuff for free at times because we're happy to move the market, everybody follow, and then they can go stick it to all those ones of ultimately getting what they want. I'm happy working with the bettors to manipulate or, take charge of the market and put it in certain aspects to help out, those that are helping us. This is a relationship enterprise and trying to work out both sides of the counter. But to highlight the profiling aspect, the court siding and then the profiling are both still very old age systems. There's no magic AI saying this bettor's, gonna beat you this much over long term. And if there was, that'd be another great aspect to it, because these operators, they're kicking out and limiting people way too early. There's way too many dolphins getting caught in the tuna nets. And the aspect of it is that's to our benefit, because ultimately these ones are going to be looking for a home. Unfortunately, a lot of them are going back to unregulated markets. We're only in 2 states right now trying to capture on them and keeping them in the ecosystem. But this is where the whole cat and mouse game, the whole ecosystem is broken. And, there's a couple of operators that can really fix it if they just got out of their own way and took bets. We saw Massachusetts have their roundtable again last week talking about minimum bet limits. There's a couple of operators that should just jump right in and put up their hand and say, we're going to do this straight away. Come in, bet. You're going to get X amount on these sports, these leagues, these main games. So we got all the way to, from CLV and Allahu's thought on 20 bets.
One thing I'll say is, you can't heap all the scorn on top of fan kings and then, the British style of bookmaking, because also, this was always an element in Vegas where the old school guys, you'd hear them on after a weekend and you'd be like, they'd be talking about whether they beat the sharps or not. And they'd be so focused on beating the sharps, okay, but were you profitable? Right? Well, if you beat the sharps, but you had a losing market that weekend, well, who cares? Who cares who's winning the money as long as you're winning more of it? And it does require more of an industry-wide investment in where are we putting our training? Where are we putting, our emphasis on it? And it's funny how we continue to kind of stake this industry to the ground. We really try and box it in very narrowly instead of really trying to free it up in a way where, look, there's lots of people who are smart on Wall Street. There's lots of people who are smart in the financial industry. Some of them win, some of them lose, depending on the day of the week, depending on the hour of the day. But somehow none of those companies are really going broke. So it's kind of maybe you guys ought to start, you got all these billions of dollars in public money. Maybe instead of continuing to bang your head against the wall it's a good time for you guys to stop and really rethink all the way through your operation about, instead of everything that they know is about how do we make our businesses profitable, like let's advertise as much as possible, let's throw as much free money at people as possible, and let's beg state lawmakers for online casino. And like, there is enough money in this ecosystem. This is a good enough business that if they came back and they fundamentally rethought about how they did their risk management and how they played this market, they would do well. How do we know that? Because the offshore industry that all this was sold on to lawmakers, I mean, all this was modeled on, did excellently all those years before PASPA was overturned. So I don't understand why somebody at those companies doesn't just stand up and say, let's try something different.
Joe, I definitely caught note of you mentioning iCasino, and we will get there in our look ahead segment. But first, I would like to begin it by a couple of trends highlighted in Hill's piece: attrition and retention. Starting with attrition, he notes operators leaving the regulated U.S. market at a fairly alarming pace, depending on your perspective. In New Jersey, for reference, at one point, there were 27 operators post-PASPA. Today, Prime is one of 13, less than half of that high water mark. Hill also notes endorsement deals and marketing budgets being scaled back. How does this align with what you guys are seeing, and what do you think it says about the foreseeable future for sports betting in the U.S.?
I think people got to take it more seriously. We've had, since the industry launched, and there's a lot of this is the money that was invested behind DraftKings, behind FanDuel, and that is trying to sell sports betting like you were selling Happy Meals. This isn't fast food. This isn't Angry Birds. That sports betting is a serious activity. There's a lot of serious money involved, but because of the way that they've done their marketing, the way they have their, the kind of customer that they're trying to acquire, and then how they're trying to wring the money out of them, they're really, it's very difficult for them to have sustainable relationships with their customers, over a 2, 3, 5-year period like we want to. Where we're hoping to go, when the way that they've done this is like, as soon as they bleed out some of these guys, then they got to stuff them full of free money, hoping that they'll top off with some money of their own in order to do this. Again, I mean, I've said it a number of times here, and I've said it elsewhere. I fault myself a lot for this, because when we were working on this, when we're working on legalization, we did not spend much time thinking about the marketing, the acquisitions, the way things were going to be, because we made certain assumptions about how this was going to be enforced by regulators, the advertising and marketing standards. And then I guess I made a lot of assumptions that, the Nevada companies because they were already operating this, would be much stronger in a post-PASPA world, and they have not been. And it wasn't like I was not warned. What I'll say is so early on in the legalization effort, met with the folks at Greenwood Racing. I mean, Bill Hogwood and Bob Green, they're two Brits. They invented the phone bet system that was eventually purchased by the Tote in the UK. And then they moved over here, and then they opened up Parks Casino, which for a long time was the top performing casino in Pennsylvania. But they said to me early on, like, Joe, if we have legalization, those British companies, the British bookmakers are going to come over here and they just rip into customers. It's all like it's just a carnivorous acquisition, squeeze the money out and acquire another customer. And, that's the thing that has really been the downside, the downfall of this industry so far. So if I had to go back, if I could take a time machine, I'd go back about 10 years. And that's the thing I would probably put more emphasis on the effort that we had.
Building on that and the relationship perhaps between attrition and retention, BetMGM CEO Adam Greenblatt is quoted in the piece noting that 90% of the growth he's seeing currently comes from existing customers. So with that in mind, how do you view the state of retention compared to new customer acquisition across the industry, and what we should expect moving forward as a result?
On the sports betting and the iCasino stuff, there's been no differentiation between these two things. And a lot of the attrition rate, again, whether we're talking players or companies, a lot of these companies shouldn't have been here in the first place. And they've also made it very expensive, some of the states. And they went into these super expensive states and blew their load early on having to bonus and then compete. And then you have the big brick and mortars and the fan kings, as Joe references them, of, they were going to get eaten alive. The Tipicos, the Betfreds, the Fubos that thought they were going to turn streaming into betting, the Twin Spires, that's the one that blows my mind, of having probably one of the best gambling databases in America, and kind of fumbled their way along and ended up exiting out. There's just a lot of stuff that sort of went in, for me, the wrong direction of overspending the marketing, which is what Joe said. They, brought that European model over, tried to integrate it into here, and it didn't work. It was different sophistication, education, lack of education of players here, and it's kind of burnt the market. Right now, the first question you get asked when you sign up a player is, what's the bonus? Or before you even sign them up, they're saying, what am I getting out of this? So they've kind of destroyed the ecosystem and the market of it, which is only going to make it hard, picking up those players that came into the ecosystem in 18, 19, 20, 21 sort of thing. As for attrition and retention and attrition and whatever else, the difference is, again, between the iGaming and the sports. A sports player is generally cheap to get and long time value. The iCasino player is expensive to get and very low long-term value, and they burn out a lot quicker. And that's sort of the balance that we're seeing. And I think the one good thing is that iGaming hasn't rolled out like many of them expected, and which is why many of them have left as well, because they didn't see that easier money coming in. It was going to be the difficult path of sports betting. The other aspect of it is the iGaming that is there is kind of giving the sports betting the reputation of the bad guy in the responsible gaming aspect. And again, tiny, tiny margins you're competing with. Sports betting generally isn't making anybody go broke. And most of the horror stories you hear is DraftKings iGaming casino, FanDuel's casino, MGM's casino. It's the iGaming world of it. So, for me right now, it's a mess. This isn't going away. It's only going to get bigger. It's only going to explode more. There's no bubble here bursting anytime soon. There's still, a dozen states to get sports betting and 40 odd to get iGaming. This is only growing. And you've also still got two of the biggest states here that don't have it right now. So it's a hard work to go forward, but it's there if you do it right and don't just overspend and glamorize it and think that you're going to do it in a certain way. And that's what the attrition of the industry is. It's not a problem that it went from 27 to 13. There's still 13 solid operators there. I think the idea is the marketing will roll back and the top two not necessarily will come back to the rest of the field, but it'll be more even, the playing field of what it takes to get a customer, what it takes to keep a customer, what it takes to treat a customer right. Because if I've learned anything more so in recent years is people are moving towards the services where they feel like they're being treated right rather than a number and something that churns through, which is the ultimate goal for us, is build the relationships player by player rather than just bombarding marketing, onboarding 1,000 players and then treating them all the same.
Yeah, there's one thing from the Paul Hill piece I think was really interesting was, I think it was the BetMGM person speaking at the legislators conference talking about the bright, shiny future of online casino, et cetera. It really does bring out the cynicism in me that these guys, how much of their strategies just go in, use sports, overpay, belly flop in front of these guys and say oh God, we just haven't been able to make a go of it. You know what? If you gave us online casinos, we'd be able to pave your roads and pay your police officers and educate your children. It was so disgraceful. And I've been in politics and I think Adam Greenblatt, who, I know going way back from when he was at Ladbrokes, he's a smart guy. I would love to be him right now because, BetMGM, Caesars, they've got those casino companies. They got those brick and mortar gaming companies to leverage off of, where they got hotel rooms and restaurants and shows and things like that. So if they really are starting to get religion about retention, those guys are really well positioned. When you look at FanDuel and DraftKings, not so much. They really have to, if you will, pay retail, and it'll cost a lot in order for them to continue to, treat those people, especially their whales, at a level that, they feel good and they're going to stick with them. When it comes to the everyday player, like the $20 player and everything, that could become a jump ball in the retention world. But of course, everybody's going to get religion about retention because California Texas, God, they might as well, the pace at which those things are going right now is going to be a long time before those guys have a reasonable shot of being able to service those marketplaces. So yeah, turning their attention, and it amazes me that it's just dawning on them now, like, let's turn our attention to treating our customers well and servicing them well. That has to be their narrative, because they don't really have an explosive growth narrative right now.
And in addition to retention, Hill talks about a lot of sports books shifting their sites to lobbying for legislation, allowing them to expand from sports to mobile slots. Guys, we've touched on iGaming a bit so far. Let's dive into it for a couple minutes right now. Hill notes that a lot of the appeal for this could be higher margins, zero risk for operators, albeit a potentially significant risk of problem gambling. And to quote the legendary Roxy Roxborough in this piece, America can survive sports betting. It survived illegal betting for years. Whether it can survive a casino on everyone's phone, that I can't answer. That might be the tipping point. So guys, what do you anticipate for the future of iGaming and its impact on society?
So for me, it is the tipping point. I've said this all the way along, that sports betting's getting treated like the bad guy, and iGaming is ultimately the big bad wolf that's waiting around to snap everyone up. You put a casino on everybody's phone, I mean, responsible gaming gets blown out of the water. It just seems like they have no comprehension and no understanding that all the issues that they're having right now with, 7 states on the iGaming roadmap? There's another 43, if I do my math correct, and there's probably some that can't get it or won't get it. To me, it's madness. They don't have any idea what's coming. As Roxy said, sports betting, it's been around for a long time. Yes, not at this level, but I really, and I'm not saying nobody, but really, ultimately, people don't go completely wiped out broke on sports betting. Yes, there's a marginal aspect to it, but on iGaming, that number could be huge. I don't know if it's 20, 30%, 40%, 50% rise on all those kind of things. Probably, 200-300x on what people on sports betting versus iCasino.
And Joe, I think there's an odd twist of irony when it comes to your perspective and some involvement on your end when it comes to this topic.
All right, so I'm feeling like a bit of a war criminal here right now, because in order to get the New Jersey sports betting law passed, we had to first pass the New Jersey online gaming bill, which we passed back in 2013. And New Jersey's been with online casino for over 10 years. However, though, I think you do see is a pretty decent natural breaking on this. Like, when you look at some of the states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania that do have online casino, they already had really strong, deep retail casino, like brick and mortar casino marketplaces. And so I think there's a bit more confidence, and also the way that they set it up, where it was the casinos themselves had much stronger control of the process, the market access, all of those things. And the regulators are very, very strong. Since that time, where you've seen the industry has, really tried to, I believe, overstretch, and they're not going to get anywhere anytime soon on it, is trying to pressure newer casino markets, newer gaming markets into online casino. The appetite is not there right now. The audience is not right there. And also when you look at, relatively new commercial gaming, and then also tribal gaming in those states, there's no appetite there for them to even begin to test the waters as to whether or not it would be cannibalistic to their existing business. So I understand why, the Fan Kings guys and then the casino guys would all be pushing for online casino. I mean, you also saw during the pandemic just how much that was kind of a savior to New Jersey and Pennsylvania when they had to shut down their casinos, and they were still really churning this. Michigan is also an online casino state, and that they've done really well with that. But it's only because they had really strong brick and mortar casinos and a long history, or a relatively long history, regulating that. So again, I think this is part and parcel of these companies just got out over their skis when it came to online sports betting. And this is one of the narratives, particularly for the public markets companies, that they have to go back, since they've not been able to do a good job of saying, like, this is how we make sports betting profitable. Sports betting is the most broadly available biggest gaming activity in the United States. That's not me saying it. That's a 1997 gambling impact study, the FBI and the Department of Justice saying that. But you got these guys saying that we need online casino in order to be profitable. And what I think this is a repudiation of it is that, A, they're not going to get it anytime soon. You're not going to see a massive expansion of this, particularly with some of the states that they've talked about. They're just too new to it. But it's also, this is, hey guys, go back to the drawing board, take a look at how you're running this, because you right now have the biggest gambling activity in the United States. There's plenty of money there to become profitable. Do a better job in rethinking what your business is.
All right. And with that, we will round the corner by touching on Hill's conclusion in the piece. There's some kind of profound irony in the fact that the gambling companies want to get rich off of gambling, but don't want to take any risks themselves. The government, the shareholders, the CEOs, they all want their money guaranteed. The rest of us, the real risk takers, we're just looking for a fair bet at a good price. Guys, what do you take away from these parting words? And how does that inform your answer to the question posed in the headline about whether the online sportsbook bubble is about to burst?
Well, it's 100% not about to burst. That's absolute crap. The second part of it is, this is what we've been saying all along. Like, give us your sports betting. Go be a casino if that's what you want to do, and take your, 3 to 5 to 7% off your slot machine. There's games out there that you can do that. But ultimately, if you're going to offer sports, offer it to everybody. It's so different than, yes, I know the card counters and the roulette players and the craps rollers and all those kind of things. They sort of go after them at times as an advantage player. But the whole point of this is to bring the unregulated market to the regulated space, tax it, build it, grow it, make everybody play in a safe environment that if they have a dispute, they can go somewhere, hopefully get a correct answer. I know there's been lots of incorrect ones, but at least they have someone to go knock on a door and say, this happened, can you help me? That's it. This is really simple. They just want to play in a space where they want to be guaranteed something that's not a business of guarantees. There's no guarantee who's going to win anything. That's why they play the game. So until someone steps in and enforces it or pushes it in that direction, these companies are going to keep doing it this way.
Look, I get it. Everybody kind of pointed their compass in a direction in a time of really irrational exuberance post-PASPA. Okay. You had a lot of people with a lot of money using those front-running companies as their, proxies. And they had a lot of ideas about sports and money and marketing and all of those things. But they did not have a very good understanding about betting and the economics of betting. And there was a lot of promises. There was a lot of expectations, these narratives. Everything was baked in early on by people who did not know what it was that they were talking about. I don't say that to be mean. I'm just saying that that's reality. And what this requires is a fundamental rethinking, okay? Wave 1.0 of sports betting in the United States is probably over. And you've seen it, the wall it's hit is with everything that you see now, from responsible gaming to the stuff about, the college player props, and then players who are everybody from Temple University, which breaks my heart, to, Jonte Porter, drank, we got his name in, all these things. That was wave 1.0. And what really needs to happen right now is kind of like a 2.0, where just give up what you can't defend. They cannot defend the way that they've been doing business. So they need to go back and they need to say, this is how we're going to change. This is how we're going to redo this, because this is the biggest sports betting marketplace on the planet and always has been. Okay. They have an excellent opportunity here because of the regulatory environment. Should be the strongest betting market on the planet. It's an excellent opportunity, but they need to go back and think about this not as a consumer product, okay, but more along the lines of this is a service, it's a hospitality industry, and it needs to be given the respect, okay, that it should be taken with. So a little bit of that old school attitude, I think, would benefit it. The new school technology, excellent. Great innovations that they've brought to it. But now I think it's time there's plenty of time for people to learn this industry, learn the economics of this industry, to start taking a clear-eyed look. And I'll say this, clearly legislators in the states that have not legalized this, they've been a fast study of what the economics are here. They've looked at the early states. They've looked at where the mistakes were made. They looked at the taxes that were generated. They've learned. And that's why we're now at a slow crawl for growth into new markets in this industry. So they either change up, do a better job with their game, or somebody's going to come along and going to knock them all on their ass.
And on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up this week. To the audience, channeling Hill's parting words, thank you for being part of Prime's journey to join the ranks of real risk takers by offering fair bets at good prices. Have a safe and happy Thanksgiving, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.